I recently lived through what can only be described as my worst waking nightmare, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. It started when the president of our HOA tried slipping a secret master key into my front door completely. Unaware that my off-duty son, who also happens to be the chief of police, was sitting silently in the living room. Her excuse? She claimed she was checking for a gas leak. The only thing leaking that day was her common sense, and by the end of it, the only door she managed to open was the one to her own jail cell. But let me take you back to how it all unfolded. I was in my armchair, pretending to read the paper. Though every fiber in my body was tuned to the strange, intrusive click of a foreign key in my lock. It wasn't mine. I know how my own key sounds. This one was clumsy, hesitant, almost smug. My heart pounded like a war drum as I glanced toward the hallway where my son Tom stood motionless in the shadows. He gave me a slow, purposeful nod. Even off-duty, a cop, especially one whose chief never really stops being a cop. Then came the doorknob turning slowly as my blood boiled with quiet fury. And just like that, the door creaked open, not with force, but with smug entitlement. In stepped Karen, our HOA Queen Bee, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of royalty. Her eyes squinted with judgment, lips pressed into a joyless line. She wore her signature beige pantsuit stiff enough to double as body armor, and behind her loomed her husband Bob, peering like a vulture, all weak chin and mean eyes, the kind that get satisfaction from others' misery. Karen wrinkled her nose as if disgusted by some imagined odor and announced, to what she thought was an empty room, that she was conducting a routine safety inspection. Her voice grated like nails on a chalkboard. She didn't see us yet. She thought the house was empty. She thought she was pulling off her little power play without consequence. Her audacity was nauseating. She crept further in, scanning the room like a predator looking for violations, dust, clutter, anything to pounce on. And that's when Tom stepped into the light. He didn't need to say a word. At 6'3", built like a linebacker in a plane. Gray tee and jeans, he was an imposing figure, but more than that. He carried that unshakable aura of authority that comes not from a badge or a title, but from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. You don't inherit that kind of authority, you earn it. And in that moment, Tom's presence filled the entire room like a rising tide, impossible to ignore. Karen froze mid-step, her self-assured swagger vanishing in an instant as sheer panic swept across her face, melting her smug expression like a snowman left in the blazing July sun. Her mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out, not even a squeak. Meanwhile, Bob, her so-called enforcer, actually stumbled backward and bumped into the doorframe, his bravado vanishing as he flicked nervous glances between Tom and me, his face draining of all color until he resembled a gasping fish flopped onto dry land. Tom took a single, deliberate step forward, his voice calm, so calm it was frightening. "Hello, Karen," he said, each syllable laced with cold authority. "That's a neat trick, a master key for the entire neighborhood." He took another slow step. "Funny, I don't remember anyone voting on that. And I'm pretty damn sure you didn't get permission to enter my father's home." Karen, shaken to the core, finally found her voice, though it trembled like a leaf in the wind. "Tom, we got a report. A gas leak." "We were just trying to ensure everyone's safety," she stammered, the lie spilling out of her mouth like oil slicking over water. Her eyes darted around in a desperate search for a way out. That's when I stood up, letting the newspaper flutter to the floor like an exclamation point. My voice was low, rough with fury. "A gas leak? Really, Karen?" I growled. "The only foul smell in this room is you." But before I could go further, Tom raised his hand, commanding silence without force. He was the law, and I was just a furious father itching to unload. This had to be done by the book, for now. He locked eyes with Karen, his gaze unblinking. "Entering a private residence without consent is criminal trespass," he said flatly. "That's a crime. And the fact that you used a master key you were never authorized to have." He paused, letting the silence twist the knife. "That's breaking and entering." The words landed like a verdict in a courtroom, heavy and final. Karen's pale complexion turned beet red, not from fear, but from sheer humiliation. The panic had passed. What replaced it now was raw, burning embarrassment, and an embarrassed Karen was a dangerous Karen, the kind who lashes out when her power slips even slightly from her grip. With a hiss of indignation, she yanked the key from the lock like it had betrayed her. "This is a misunderstanding," she spat, her voice brittle and venom-laced. "You have no proof." But Tom only smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile you'd mistake for friendly. It was quiet, measured, and lethal. "Oh, I think I do," he said, nodding subtly toward the tiny security camera nestled above the doorway, its blinking red light betraying its silent witness. Every second of her unlawful entry, every arrogant twist of that stolen key had been recorded in full high definition. The realization hit her like a brick wall. The fury on her face clashed violently with the humiliation twisting her features into a mask of rage and defeat. Without another word, she snatched Bob's arm like a leash and stormed off, dragging him down the steps like excess baggage. But just before she left, she turned one last time, her hand trembling as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You'll regret this," she growled. "Both of you. This is my neighborhood. You play by my rules or you won't be playing at all." And with that, she slammed the door behind her like a judge handing down a sentence. Tom and I stood. In the silence that followed, a silence so thick it seemed to press in on us, I looked at him. He looked at me. No words were needed. We both knew this was far from over. Karen had just drawn a battle line, and we had stomped across it without hesitation. Her threat wasn't hollow. She meant every word. She would be back, and she would come with the full force of her petty empire, using every twisted HOA bylaw like a weapon. The only question was, what would her first move be? I hadn't moved to this peaceful lakeside town to start a war. In fact, I'd come here to escape one. My entire life had been about conflict, about tracking down dangerous people and making sure they could never harm anyone again. It was a brutal job, thankless and scarring, and it took everything from me. Most of all, it took Sarah, my wife, my anchor, not through violence, but through a cruel illness that not even all my fight could conquer. When she passed, the color drained out of my world. The fire inside me went cold. I didn't want battles anymore. I just wanted peace. It was my younger brother David who found this place for me, this little lakeside town tucked away from the world. He was always the smarter one, the calm counterbalance to my storm. While I was breaking down doors, he was busy building something his. Life, his business, his future. He knew I was adrift, unmoored in the silence of loss and transition. "You need a project, Frank," David had said gently. "Something to build, not break." That's when he showed me the listing for this house, a bit run down. Sure, but solid, with strong bones and a wraparound porch that overlooked the still waters of the lake. It was more than a house, it was a promise. A place where the loudest sound would be birdsong at sunrise, where I could repair more than just walls, maybe even patch the broken parts inside myself. Tom, my son, helped me move in. Despite being the police chief of the neighboring town, he made the drive every weekend without fail. Together, we tore out old floors, painted over years of wear, and rebuilt the porch from the foundation up. We didn't need many words, just the quiet understanding shared by fathers and sons working side by side. But I saw the worry in his eyes, the way he looked at me like a man watching a ticking clock. He knew too much peace can feel like a prison to someone who spent their life in the fight. And he was right to be worried. At first, the quiet was exactly what I needed. I started meeting the neighbors like Hank, the retired mailman with a yard full of bizarre garden gnomes. He was a quirky guy, always whispering like the trees had ears. "Watch out for the queen," he warned one day while trimming his hedges. I thought he was paranoid until I met Karen, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as the HOA president, but it didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like an audit. Her eyes scanned me like a barcode, and before I could blink, she was informing me that my mailbox was half an inch too low. That was my first clue. The Queen had spotted a new subject. The HOA rules were absolutely bonkers. No street parking for more than an hour. Garbage cans couldn't be visible from the road unless it was trash day, and even then only between 6 o'clock and 8 a.m. Holiday decorations required approval from a committee of one, her. Hank once told me she fined him $50 because one of his gnomes was displaying a lack of seasonal appropriateness in July. It was absurd, but I didn't move here to make waves. I just wanted to be left in peace. So I adjusted the mailbox. I kept the car in the garage. I followed the rules, ridiculous as they were. But that still wasn't enough for Karen. She didn't just crave obedience, she demanded fear. Control wasn't enough unless it was absolute, and she wielded it like a weapon. Bob, her ever-watchful husband, played the role of silent enforcer. He'd stroll the neighborhood with his yapping little dog, eyes scanning homes like a prison guard doing roll call. One overgrown blade of grass, one slightly tilted lawn ornament, and the next morning you'd find a violation notice in your mailbox like a scarlet letter. They were a miserable, power-drunk duo who fed off the submission of this quiet lakeside community. Most of the residents were older, retired, just looking to enjoy their final chapter in peace. So they paid the fines, nodded obediently, and kept their heads down to avoid conflict. My first real confrontation with Karen came over something deeply personal, my 1968 Mustang Fastback. I'd rebuilt it with my own two hands, restoring it piece by piece, pouring in sweat, time, and memory. It wasn't just a car. It was my last tangible connection to the man I used to be. It was bold, loud, fast, and undeniably mine. Naturally, Karen hated it. She called it a nuisance vehicle and then tried to push through a new HOA rule, banning cars older than 10 years from being parked in driveways. So I showed up at the next HOA meeting, my first, and found myself in a room that felt more like a courtroom. The meeting was held in the small community clubhouse, but Karen ran it like a petty dictatorship. No one was allowed to speak for more than a minute, and any disagreement was immediately shut down. When I stood to argue against her ridiculous rule, she didn't even look at me. "We're not here to discuss your noisy hot rod, Mr. Miller," she snapped, cutting me off mid-sentence. The rule passed anyway. A few of her loyal lapdogs voted with her, while the rest of the room just stared at their shoes in silence. That was the moment I felt the old fire rise in my chest again. This wasn't about a car. It was about a bully, tyrant with a clipboard slowly suffocating a community too afraid to push back. That night, I called my brother David. "This woman is something else," I told him. He paused on the other end before replying. "Be careful, Frank. People like that don't have power in the real world. So the little power they do get, they guard it with everything they've got. Don't underestimate her." And he was right. I'd spent my entire life chasing monsters in the shadows, but Karen was the kind that hid in plain sight, and she played a long game. I never imagined I'd find a monster living right next door, cloaked not in shadows but in khakis and a clipboard, hiding behind a fortress of arbitrary rules and fake authority. The failed break-in wasn't her first move, it was simply the first time she'd gone in for the kill. And now that she'd missed, I knew she'd come back harder, meaner, and more calculated. She wasn't the type to let humiliation go unanswered. 2 days after that confrontation, the first shot landed in my mailbox, a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo glaring from the corner like a threat in plain sight. No stamp, which meant Karen had delivered it herself, probably under cover of night like some twisted reverse Santa Claus. Inside was a fine, $500 for unauthorized security modifications. In other words, she was fining me for the camera that had caught her red-handed breaking into my house. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I crushed the paper in my hand, the anger so intense it felt radioactive, like it might scorch a hole right through my chest. This was her opening move, a small but spiteful strike, a reminder that in her mind, she still held the reins. I called Tom right away. "She fined me for the camera," I said, trying to keep my voice level, but every word came out like a growl. On the other end of the line, Tom exhaled heavily. "Dad, don't pay it. It's retaliation. It's illegal." "I'm not paying it," I shot back. "I'm going over there to and do what?" He interrupted, his voice sharp and steady. "Lose your temper? Yell? Give her the scene she's baiting you for. She record it, twist it, and use it to paint you as the aggressor. You know how she plays. Don't give her ammunition." And of course, he was right. He always was. Where I ran hot, he stayed cool. That's why he wore the badge. My instincts were forged in chaos. His were tempered by patience. He didn't just see the next move, he saw the whole game. So I cooled off, just barely. But she wasn't finished. The very next day, another letter arrived. This one nastier than the last. A $1,000 fine for improper lawn maintenance. My grass was trimmed, my edges clean, but it didn't matter. This wasn't about rules. This was war. I walked outside, still clutching the second fine, and stared at my lawn with narrowed eyes. It was flawless, freshly mowed just 2 days prior, the grass trimmed like a golf course. I got down on my hands and knees, scouring the edge by the curb, and there it was, a single defiant dandelion poking up like a middle finger. One weed, that was it. Karen must have sent Bob out with a magnifying glass and marching orders. It wasn't just petty anymore. It was harassment, pure and simple. But Karen was only getting started. The real escalation hit Friday night like a sucker punch. I was dead asleep when a thunderous knock shook the front door, jolting me awake around midnight. Heart pounding, I grabbed the heavy flashlight I keep next to the bed and moved to the door, flipping on the porch light. 2 sheriff's deputies stood there, young, unsure, and clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, we've had a noise complaint," one said. "Noise complaint?" I asked, still groggy. I was asleep. He hesitated. "Caller said you were using power tools in your garage." It was nonsense, a bald-faced lie. Karen had called them, using law enforcement like pawns in her personal vendetta. I told them the truth, explained the ongoing harassment, even mentioned who my son was. They nodded, apologized, and left, but their presence had already delivered the real message. Karen could call the police on me whenever she pleased, no matter how false the charge. She could weaponize the system, shatter my peace, and steal my sleep all with one phone call. But that wasn't the end. No, her grand finale came the following Monday, loud and unmistakable. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard it, the sharp beep-beep of a truck reversing down my driveway. I rushed to the window, and my heart dropped into my gut. A massive tow truck was backing up to my Mustang, chains already snaking toward her like metal vipers. My Mustang, my pride, my therapy on wheels. I didn't even stop for shoes. I flew out the door barefoot, fire in my chest. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I yelled. The driver, a broad guy in a greasy shirt with the expression of someone just following orders, gave a lazy shrug. "Got a removal order from the HOA, says the vehicle's in violation." "The hell it is," I snapped, my voice like gravel in thunder. I stepped between the tow truck and my Mustang, planting myself like a wall of stone, heart pounding and mind racing. This was the moment Tom had warned me about, the tipping point where anger could eclipse judgment, where one wrong move could cost me everything. I could feel it, the red wave of fury building inside me, ready to crash through the dam of my restraint. But this wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the fragile promise I'd made to myself when I moved here to find peace, to rebuild quietly. And now this woman, this petty tyrant with a clipboard and a grudge, was trying to rip that peace away, dragging it down the street behind a rusted tow truck. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Tom. I forced my voice to stay level, even though every nerve in my body was on fire. "Tom, she's towing the Mustang. Right now." I heard the shift in his voice immediately. The cool, composed police chief disappeared. This was now a son defending his father. "Don't do anything, Dad. I'm on my way." I looked the driver dead in the eye. "You can wait for the chief of police," I said, "or you can try to go through me." He studied my face for a moment, and whatever he saw made him think twice. He killed the engine and leaned against the side of the truck, waiting. 10 minutes never felt so long in my life. Just me, the Mustang, and a man who had no idea how close he was to making a very bad decision. When Tom finally pulled up, it wasn't in his squad car, but he was in full uniform, radiating command like a storm rolling in. He didn't even glance at me. He walked straight to the driver, face carved from granite. "You got a signed work order for this tow?" he asked. The driver handed over a paper. Tom read it, then held it up. "This is signed by Karen Thompson," he said. "She's the president of a private HOA. That gives her absolutely no legal authority to seize private property from a private driveway. What you've just attempted here is grand theft auto." The driver's face went pale. He glanced between Tom and the Mustang like the car might explode. I was just doing my job," he stammered. Tom didn't flinch. "Your job is to follow the law. Now unhook my father's car and get off this property before I impound your truck as evidence." The driver didn't need a second warning. He moved so fast I thought he'd pull a muscle, unhooking the chains like they were on fire. Moments later, he was gone in a squeal of tires, not even daring a glance back. Tom finally turned to me. The fury was still in his eyes, but it was tempered focused. "This is war, Dad," he said quietly, and I knew then. We weren't just fighting for my car, or my lawn, or my peace. We were fighting for the soul of this place. She crossed a line she can't uncross, and there was no going back now. No more waiting. No more reacting, Tom said, his voice sharp with resolve. "It's time to go on the offensive. It's time we start digging." And he was right. Karen hadn't just declared war, she'd fired the first real shot by trying to steal my Mustang, her attempt to take her first prisoner. But she failed, and now it was our turn to strike back. No more warning shots, no more passive resistance. We were going to dismantle her petty little empire, one brick at a time. The war room was my kitchen table, cleared of everything but HOA. Bylaws, a stack of fine notices she'd sent me, and a fresh pot of black coffee fueling our determination. "She's not just a bully," I muttered, watching Tom's eyes scan the documents. "This is too much, too fast. It feels panicked-like. She's hiding something." Tom nodded, frowning thoughtfully as he tapped a pen on the table. "Power is a drug, Dad, but this kind of escalation? It usually comes with a price tag. People don't stick their necks out this far unless there's something worth protecting. Let's start with the money." That was Tom's brilliance where I charged in headfirst. He calculated. He was the mind, I was the muscle. Together, we worked like gears in a clock. Our first move was textbook. I sent a certified letter to Karen as a legal homeowner, formally requesting full financial records for the past 5 years, budgets, expense reports, and all vendor contracts. As a member of the HOA, I had every right to see where the money was going. Her reply came 3 days later, and it was an absolute insult, a single page filled with vague numbers and meaningless categories. Landscaping, maintenance, administrative. No breakdowns, no receipts, no invoices, no names, nothing that could be verified. It was a smokescreen. A deliberate stonewall. Tom looked at the flimsy sheet and let out a slow, controlled breath. "She's stonewalling," he said, holding it up like trash. "She thinks we're just angry old men who'll give up and go away." He locked eyes with me and picked up his phone. "Okay, plan B." As chief of police, Tom couldn't just open an official investigation into a civil organization like an HOA without hard evidence or probable cause, but he had friends, and he knew how to use his network. He placed a quiet call to a buddy in the state's Financial Crimes Unit. He didn't request an investigation, just advice. "If you suspected an HOA was cooking the books," he asked, "what would you look for first?" While Tom worked the official side of things, I rolled up my sleeves and took on the unofficial route. I started talking to my neighbors, not an easy task in a neighborhood ruled by fear. Most of them scattered the moment they saw me coming, suddenly remembering a bush that needed trimming or a mailbox that needed urgent attention. But I was patient, persistent. I showed up with cookies, courtesy of my brother David, and asked about their families, their pets, the weather. I didn't start with Karen. I just listened. And slowly, stories started to surface, whispered at first, then growing louder. One elderly woman told me she'd been fined for having a non-compliant front door, then pressured to hire a specific contractor to replace it. The bill? Double the market rate. Another neighbor recalled a special assessment for roadwork, thousands of dollars collected, but the job was rushed, shoddy, and the potholes returned within months. Different stories, same pattern. Outrageous fines, sudden fees, and Karen always had a preferred vendor lined up to do the overpriced work. The turning point came from Hank, the retired mailman with the gnomes. Still jittery, but finally, fed up, he leaned across the fence under the pretense of checking a rose bush and hissed, "She's a crook, Frank, a bona fide crook." He explained that the landscaping company used by the HOA was owned by Karen's cousin. The paving contractor? Her brother-in-law. It was all in the family, a cycle of kickbacks, nepotism, and quiet fraud. That was the crack we needed. I brought it straight to Tom, and his face lit up not with excitement, but with the laser focus of a man who had just found his target. He'd uncovered something too. The landscaping company, Green Dreams Landscaping, was registered to a P.O. box, not a physical address. The paving company followed the same pattern. They were ghost companies, no office, no staff, no legitimacy. Just paper trails leading straight back to Karen's crooked little empire. Shell companies designed to funnel HOA funds into the pockets of Karen's family. That's what we were uncovering, layer by layer, and we were getting close enough that the cracks in her control were starting to show. The pressure was rising, and Karen, sensing the walls closing in, started to unravel. Her tactics became more erratic, more vindictive. My trash cans would mysteriously vanish on garbage day. Nails started appearing in my driveway like little landmines. Then came the night I was on the phone with David, telling him everything. "We dug up. Sounds like you've got her cornered," he said. "But be careful, nothing's more dangerous than a cornered animal." His words echoed ominously the next morning when I opened my door and found a picture of David taped there. It was a headshot from his company's website, smiling and professional, except now it had a single word scrawled across it in thick red marker: next. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't about HOA rules or power anymore. She had crossed into something darker. This was a threat clear, deliberate, and deeply personal. My brother, who lived 100 miles away and had nothing to do with any of this, was now a target. She was showing her teeth, trying to intimidate me. But instead of fear, something else settled into my chest, a cold, focused fury. This wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. She had declared war on my family, and that made it personal in a way she couldn't begin to understand. I looked at that photo and made a vow I wouldn't just expose Karen or win some moral victory. I was going to dismantle her life brick by brick, burn down the paper castle she'd built, and make damn sure she never hurt anyone again. Justice and law used to be the same thing to me, but the line between them was starting to blur, and for the first time, I didn't care. When I showed Tom the picture, he saw the look in my eyes, that old, cold fire he hadn't seen since I hung up my badge. He put a hand on my shoulder, steady and grounding. "We'll get her, Dad," he said softly, "but we'll do it the right way." I nodded, but I was already somewhere else, entirely deep in the shadows, where doing things the right way had never been enough. We pushed harder, doubling our efforts with laser focus, and Tom found the perfect legal angle. He leveraged a technicality, arguing that Karen's relentless campaign against me, as the father of a law enforcement officer, could constitute witness tampering, which gave him the probable cause he needed to subpoena the HOA's bank records. It was a bank records. It was a brilliant surgical move that cut right through the red tape. While we waited for the bank to respond, I turned my attention to the leads we'd already had, the fake companies, Green Dreams Landscaping and Premium Paving, and started digging into who was actually cashing the checks. That's when I made a call to an old friend, a guy I'll call Charlie, a ghost in the machine with a talent for unearthing secrets. I gave him the company names, the PO box addresses, and nothing else. "Give me 24 hours, he said. He didn't ask questions. He never did. The next day, Charlie called back, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. "Those checks, massive checks, tens of thousands, they're not going to cousins or in-laws. They're being deposited into an account under the name Robert Thompson." My jaw clenched. Bob, Karen's quiet, lurking husband. The so-called enforcer with the yappy dog. Turns out, Bob was the landscaper and the paver, and God knows what else. A shell game of fake vendors, staged work, and padded invoices, all of it funneling HOA money straight into his pocket. But that wasn't the real bombshell. Charlie kept digging. "Here's the kicker," he said. "Robert Thompson isn't even his real name. Your boy Bob used to be Robert Bobby Genevieve, sealed juvie record, but the adult one, not so sealed. Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, 5 years in state prison." A cold shiver slid down my spine. Bob wasn't just Karen's little lapdog, he was a convicted felon, a violent one, and he'd built a new life under a fake name. Karen didn't just marry a control freak, she married a career criminal. And together, they created a suburban empire, not just to bleed us dry, but to keep themselves safe from the past. Suddenly, her obsession with control, her paranoia, her ruthless grip on the HOA, it all snapped into focus. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about survival. about hiding in plain sight behind a white picket fence. She was protecting him, shielding a monster with a fresh lawn and a leash in his hand. And as I hung up the phone, my eyes locked on Bob outside, casually walking that ridiculous little dog like he was just another neighbor enjoying the day. But I knew better now. He wasn't just Karen's silent sidekick, he was the real threat, the one hiding behind her clipboard and bogus finds. A wolf in sheep's clothing, a man with a record of violence and a talent for staying hidden. The nails in my driveway, the picture of my brother, those weren't Karen's style. That was Bob, sending messages the way he knew best, quiet, dirty, and dangerous. All this time I'd been focused on the queen, but I'd missed the beast crouched behind her throne. I called Tom and told him everything. The silence on the line stretched long, and when he finally spoke, his voice was tight. "Dad, this is big. This isn't about HOA violations anymore. This is felony-level stuff, fraud, identity theft. Maybe even a parole violation if he's still on parole." I could hear the shift in his tone, the detective in him already listing charges, preparing the foundation for a takedown. But my thoughts weren't on the courtroom, they were on the sidewalks and the porches of my neighborhood. I thought of the elderly woman who was bullied into paying double for a door, the young families who kept their kids inside, afraid of making noise. They weren't just victims of a power-drunk HOA president, they were being extorted by a felon with a long fuse and a violent past. Karen had the brain, but Bob was the brawn, the muscle, the dark silhouette lurking just out of reach. That night, sleep never came. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, haunted by that photo of my brother, with the word "next" scrawled in red. That wasn't just intimidation, it was a threat from someone who knew how to follow through. Someone who'd already served time and probably wouldn't hesitate to go back. Tom wanted to do it by the book, build the case, get the warrants, go through the proper channels. It was the right plan, smart, lawful. But as the hours dragged by and my family's faces floated through my thoughts, I couldn't shake the fear. What if it wasn't fast enough? What if they made bail before we were ready? What if Bob came for us before justice could stop him? That secret we uncovered, it wasn't just criminal. It was dangerous. And now, it was personal. This changed everything, the stakes, the urgency, the entire battlefield. We were no longer just fighting for a quiet street or the right to park a car in our own driveway. We were fighting for our safety, for our lives. When the bank records arrived, they exposed Karen and Bob's empire for what it truly was, a blueprint of greed, corruption, and betrayal. Page after page showed a steady stream of checks funneled from the HOA account to Bob's fake businesses, followed by suspicious cash withdrawals, then extravagant purchases that made our stomachs turn. A luxury SUV in Karen's name, a fishing boat under Bob's, first-class airline tickets, 5-star resorts, designer everything. They had turned our HOA dues into their personal ATM, and we had all unknowingly bankrolled their private paradise. Tom sifted through the evidence, his voice hard with conviction as he laid it out across my kitchen table. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, it's airtight. I'll have a warrant signed by sunrise. We can take them both down. He looked at me, expecting that moment of catharsis, that surge of relief, but I didn't feel it. I was staring across the street at the glowing windows of their house, knowing those two were inside, sipping wine, completely unaware that the walls were closing in. "An arrest isn't enough," I said, my voice low and cold. Tom's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Dad? We've got them." "They're going to prison." I turned to him. "And between now and then, they get a lawyer, make bail, walk right back into that house. And Bob, he's already threatened David. He's already sabotaged my truck. What do you think he'll do when he knows he's facing 20 years in a cell?" Tom paused. The lawman in him wanted to push back, but the man who had watched his family get stalked and tormented, understood. He saw it in my eyes. "So what are you thinking?" he asked, cautious, torn between duty and blood. And that's when I told him the plan I had been shaping ever since I discovered Bob's real identity. A plan that didn't rely on court dates or plea deals. A plan that would take everything they built and burn it to the ground before the gavel even dropped. It wasn't a plan rooted in justice. It was one forged from fury and aimed at absolute destruction. "I don't just want them arrested," I told Tom, my voice cold and razor sharp. "I want them ruined, humiliated. I want every neighbor they've ever bullied to watch them fall, to see exactly who they really are before a single cop sets foot on their porch. I want to flip their little empire inside out and let the truth rot them from the inside." We had the ammo proof of fraud. Video footage from our doorbell cam showing Karen breaking into our home and Bob's buried criminal past. "I'm going to leak it, all of it," I said. Tom's face went pale. "Dad, no. That's evidence. You leak that, you jeopardize the whole case. It's vigilante stuff. It's not how we do things." "It's how I do things," I snapped, my patience gone. "Your way lets them lawyer up, spin their lies, and maybe walk. My way strips them bare before they can even think about striking back. It's public shame. It's justice before the courtroom." "Where's the line between law and revenge, Tom?" Because for me, it was crossed the second they threatened David. We argued loud, raw, emotional. He begged me to stay on the legal path, to let the system do its job. But the system was slow. These people were poison, and they needed to be cut out fast. He was afraid for his badge. I was afraid for our family. In the end, we reached a bitter stalemate. He wouldn't be part of my plan, but he wouldn't stand in my way either. "Just think about it, Dad," he said quietly as he left, the weight of the moment dragging his voice down. "Don't do something you can't come back from." When the door closed behind him, silence swallowed the house. For the first time in this war, my son and I stood on opposite sides of the battlefield. Doubt crept in. Was I letting the fire inside me twist who I was? Was I becoming the very thing I once fought against? I needed clarity. Not from a cop. From blood. I picked up the phone and called my brother David. I told him everything. The fraud, the threats, Bob's record, and then I told him the plan. The real plan. To burn it all to the ground. He listened quietly, not interrupting once, and when I finally finished unloading the entire plan, there was a long, heavy pause on the line. "Well," David said at last, his voice calm and steady as ever, "he picked the wrong family to mess with." I blinked. "So, you think I should do it?" I asked, not expecting him to be on board. "Frank," he said. Your whole life you've walked a very specific line. You've protected people. You used the rules when they worked, and you bent them when they didn't. This isn't any different. That man Bob, he's a predator. And his wife, she's the enabler. They prey on the weak, but you're not weak. You're the firewall. You've got the power to stop them, not just for you, but for every scared neighbor on that block. Tom's a cop, he has to play inside the system. You don't. This isn't about law versus revenge. It's about protection. The question is, how do you keep your family and your home safe? His voice was firm. The answer is, by any means, necessary. And that was it. That calm certainty from my level-headed brother locked it in. He was right. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. It was about stopping predators before they could do more damage. I hung up the phone with a fire in my chest and steel in my spine. My plan was dangerous. It was chaotic. It was very likely illegal, but it was right. Tom would stay on the official path. He'd handle the courts and the warrants. I'd handle the firestorm. We'd divide the battle. He'd bring the law, and I'd bring the war. And when we were finished, there wouldn't be a single brick left of Karen and Bob's false little empire, just scorched earth and broken illusions. The moral crossroads was already far behind me. I had chosen my path. It was locked in. The plan itself was simple, but its impact had to be nuclear. Our greatest weapon wasn't a bullet or a badge, it was the truth. And I was about to turn that truth into a bomb. In exactly 1 week, the annual HOA election meeting would take place, Karen's favorite day of the year, her night to bask in power like a queen. This time, it wouldn't be her coronation. It would be her execution. My kitchen table, once the center of quiet family dinners, was no longer just a war room. It was the launch pad for her downfall. It was an arsenal. Plain and simple stacked high on my kitchen table were the bank statements, a printed list of the ghost companies, Bob's mugshot staring up with that smug, hollow stare, and a copy of the video footage showing Karen breaking into my home like a common burglar. My first target wasn't the courtroom, it was the neighborhood itself. If we wanted justice, I had to flip the script and turn Karen's carefully cultivated image into ashes. So I got to work. Over the next few days, I assembled packages, anonymous folders, one for every single house on the block. Inside each was a clean, concise one-page summary of the financial fraud, complete with dollar amounts stolen from the community, a copied bank statement to prove it, and at the bottom, bold as a billboard, the words, H.O.A. election meeting. Tuesday, 7 p.m. Demand answers. I kept Bob's criminal history out for now. That was my ace, my nuclear button. The night before I planned to deliver the folders, Hank appeared at my door, pale and shaking, gripping a garden gnome like a lifeline. "Frank, they're planning something," he whispered, eyes darting nervously. Bob was loading boxes into his truck at midnight, and Karen was yelling about shredders on the phone. My gut clenched. They were trying to destroy the evidence. Of course they were. They could feel the noose tightening. My requests for financial records, Tom's subpoenas, they weren't blind. They knew the hammer was coming. And now they were trying to erase their crimes. I didn't have time anymore. We couldn't wait for the election. We had to catch them in the act. I called Tom immediately. They're shredding evidence right now." His voice came back tight with urgency and frustration. "I can't get a warrant that fast. A neighbor seeing boxes isn't enough for a judge." "Then we'll get you more," I said, fire rising in my voice. "I've got an idea." The plan I pitched was bold, reckless, maybe, but it might just work. It needed bait, guts, and perfect timing. After I laid it out, Tom went silent. "That's entrapment, Dad," he said carefully. "No," I replied firmly. "Entrapment is getting someone to commit a crime they weren't planning. These two? They're already committing it. We're just making sure they do it somewhere we can see." He didn't like it. I could hear the weight of his badge pulling at his conscience, but he didn't say no. He couldn't. He knew, just like I did, this might be our only shot to bring them down before everything got shredded and buried forever. The bait was a carefully crafted email, sent from a fake, anonymous address, something like Hoacher22, that looked just believable enough to trigger panic. I kept the message. Short and ominous. The bank records, the invoices, all of it. "See you at the meeting." Just the right mix of vague and threatening. It was a total bluff, of course, but one I knew they couldn't afford to ignore. The goal wasn't to scare them, it was to push them into making a mistake. And we were ready. Hank's house became our observation post. His living room window had a perfect, unobstructed view of Karen and Bob's garage. We set up a high-powered surveillance camera complete with a telephoto lens on a tripod aimed straight at the house. Tom supplied the gear, unofficially borrowing it from the department's surveillance van. "If anyone asks," he muttered, "this conversation never happened." So there we were, me, Tom, and a jittery Hank who was stress-eating chips loud. Enough to break the tension, sitting in the dark with only the glow of the camera screen lighting the room. For hours, nothing happened. The sky darkened, streetlights hummed on, and I started to worry I'd overplayed my hand, that maybe Karen and Bob were too cautious, or worse, too smart to fall for it. But then, at exactly 10:47 p.m., the garage light flicked on, followed by the rumble of the door lifting. Bob's truck backed into the driveway, and that's when the real show began. One after another, he and Karen hauled box after box from the house, armloads of binders, ledgers, and files, moving like people on the edge of a nervous breakdown. They weren't just relocating paperwork. They were evacuating their entire criminal operation. My bluff had landed right on target. "Got them," Tom whispered, eyes locked on the camera screen, hitting the record button. Every frantic trip from the house to the truck, every box shoved into the bed, it was all being captured. We had what we needed, visual confirmation of a coordinated attempt to destroy evidence enough for a warrant. Tom stood up, adrenaline pumping, ready to head out and wake up a judge. But before he could move, I reached out and grabbed his arm. "Wait," I whispered, pointing toward the screen. Something was off. Bob had just loaded the last box into the truck, but instead of getting in, he walked back into the garage and headed to the rear wall where a large metal tool cabinet stood. With slow, deliberate effort, he slid it aside, revealing something I had never seen before: a small, hidden door tucked into the wall, totally absent from the original blueprints of the house, which I had a copy of. Bob then proceeded to unlock not one, not two, but 3 deadbolts before quietly slipping inside. Moments later, He emerged carrying a small, heavy-looking metal box different from the rest. He held it with both hands, careful and reverent, like it wasn't just fragile, but sacred. Instead of tossing it into the bed of the truck with the other boxes, he placed it gently in the front seat, shut the door with precision, then locked the entire truck and returned inside, closing the hidden door behind him. The garage light clicked off. The door rumbled shut. Silence. In Hank's darkened living room, no one moved. Even Hank stopped chewing his chips. What was that? He asked in a whisper. I turned to Tom, whose face had lost all color. His eyes were still glued to the screen, and I could see the gears in his mind spinning like mad. That wasn't a H.O.A. business, he murmured. That wasn't about money. He was right. That box wasn't just another ledger or financial record, it was different. The secrecy, the care, the hidden room. This wasn't just embezzlement. We had just stumbled onto something much deeper and far more dangerous. What the hell was in that box? That hidden compartment rewrote the entire narrative. We weren't just trying to expose a corrupt neighborhood queen anymore. We were about to dig up a buried secret so dark they had constructed a chamber just to contain it. Without saying much more, Tom left Hank's place like a man possessed. He had enough. Now video evidence of Bob accessing a concealed space, possibly moving evidence, maybe even something criminal. He called in a favor, woke up a judge, and by sunrise had a search warrant not just for the house, but for the truck and that mysterious metal box. The plan was to quietly execute the search the following morning before the H.O.A. meeting. But I had a different vision, one that felt more poetic, more powerful. No, I told Tom over the phone. We don't do this behind closed doors. We do it at the meeting. We let her walk into that clubhouse thinking she's still queen of the neighborhood. Then we pull the throne out from under her in front of everyone. We let her stand up there, basking in her false glory, thinking she was about to be crowned queen once again, and then we would drop the hammer. Dad, that's a circus, Tom protested, wary of the public spectacle. It's a controlled environment, I argued firmly. All our witnesses will be there, all her loyal followers. There's nowhere for her to run. We control the narrative. We control the scene. It's the perfect stage. Though clearly uncomfortable with the theatrics, Tom reluctantly agreed. From a tactical standpoint, it made sense. While he assembled his team for the legal takedown, I finalized my own offensive. I printed multiple copies of Bob's mugshot, loaded the footage of Karen breaking into my home onto thumb drives, and selected the most damning financial statements, the kind even her most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. The original packets I had made were now irrelevant. This had evolved into something far bigger, more explosive. On the day of the meeting, an unmarked surveillance unit parked quietly down the street from Karen's house. They watched Bob as he pulled out of the driveway in the same truck that carried the mysterious metal box. An officer tailed him discreetly. Bob drove 2 towns over to a remote storage facility, disappeared inside for a few minutes, and emerged empty-handed. The team marked the unit number. We had the location. Phase 1 was officially complete. That evening, the community clubhouse buzzed with tension and unspoken anticipation. It was standing room only, more neighbors than I'd ever seen at a knee. meeting, their restlessness fed by the anonymous tips and growing unease that something massive was about to break. You could feel the shift in the air, like a storm gathering. People whispered, exchanged suspicious glances. I spotted Hank near the back, pale and twitchy, giving me a nervous thumbs up with fingers that looked ready to tremble off his hand. Even David was there, standing beside me with that calm, stoic energy only he possessed. "Showtime," he murmured. Right on cue, Karen and Bob swept in, fashionably late, playing the roles they'd perfected. Karen, smug and radiant, wearing that politician's smile like armor. Bob, looming just behind her, arms crossed, scanning the room like a silent threat. She thought the crowd was there to celebrate her. She believed the hushed murmurs were about her re-election, her legacy. She thought she'd pulled it off, that she'd won, that the evidence was hidden, the paper trail buried. But what she didn't know, what neither of them could possibly suspect, was that the curtain was about to rise, and the final act of their empire was about to be played right before their eyes. They thought they were safe. Karen took the podium with the smug confidence of someone who believed they'd silenced every threat. She launched into a speech dripping with hypocrisy, talking about community standards, the importance of order, and fiscal responsibility, as if she hadn't spent years bleeding us dry. Then she turned her attention to me. With a voice laced in phony concern, she said, "It has come to my attention that some residents have been spreading malicious rumors, false information designed to undermine the good work of this board. One resident in particular, Mr. Frank Miller, has been a source of constant disruption." It was classic Karen preemptive shaming to try and discredit me before I could speak. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I let her monologue, every lie digging her deeper. When she finished with a smug, "Now, are there any questions before we vote?" I raised my hand. The entire room turned to me. "Yes, Mr. Miller," she said with that predator's grin. "I have a few," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "First, could you tell us who owns Green Dreams Landscaping?" Her smile twitched. That's not relevant," she stammered. "Oh, I think it is," I pressed, "since the owner is your husband, Bob, and this HOA has paid his company over $200,000 in the last 5 years. Gasps filled the room like a wave. I began passing out the financial statements, page after page of proof. Neighbors snatched them up, outrage growing with each scanned line. Bob stepped forward aggressively, but Tom, standing silently by the the door in plain clothes, gave a single shake of his head. Bob froze. "And since we're on the subject of Mr. Thompson," I continued, louder now, "maybe you can explain why his real name is Robert Genovese and why he has a conviction for armed robbery." I held up his mugshot. The room exploded in shouts and accusations. Karen stood frozen, face pale, eyes wide. "Lies, these are lies," she screamed. "Really?" I shouted back. "Then maybe you can explain the footage I have of you using an illegal master key to break into my house." That's when Tom gave the nod. The clubhouse doors burst open as uniformed officers entered, eyes locked on Corinne and Bob, and for the first time all night, they realized they were no longer in control. But it wasn't just a crowd of angry neighbors that entered. It was 4 uniformed deputies, their presence slicing through the chaos like a blade. Tom stepped forward, badge in hand, and with a voice that commanded silence announced, Karen Thompson and Robert Genovese, you are both under arrest." The room froze as reality crashed down, but the biggest twist was still to come. As the deputies moved in to cuff them, another officer entered, holding the metal box retrieved from the storage unit. He handed it to Tom, who opened it right there, for everyone to see. What spilled out wasn't just damning, it was staggering. Multiple passports, each with different names for Karen and Bob. Piles of birth certificates and social security cards. This wasn't just a fraud ring, they were neck-deep in an elaborate web of identity theft. And then Tom reached the bottom of the box and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. He flipped open the cover, read the first page, and his expression went rigid. Without looking at the suspects, he turned to the lead deputy and said, "This isn't just fraud. This is a confession journal belonging to a man named Martin Gables. He's been missing for 20 years from a town in Nevada." Then he turned his eyes to Bob. "A town you used to live in, Mr. Genovese. According to this, Martin didn't just go missing. He was murdered. And this journal says you were there." The room fell into a silence so thick it felt like the air had stopped moving. We hadn't just exposed a thief or a corrupt H.O.A. tyrant, we had uncovered a killer. This wasn't a cover-up of embezzlement. It was a cover-up of a murder. Karen's legs buckled slightly, and she let out a guttural sob, raw and broken, the sound of a world crumbling. She didn't even look at Bob. Her mask of control, of superiority, shattered completely. But Bob changed. The pitiful, submissive act vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating menace of a man with nothing left to lose. The look in his eyes, wild and unhinged, was the same as in that mugshot, the look of someone dangerous and cornered. He wasn't looking at Karen or Tom. He was scanning for exits, scanning for anything he could use as a weapon. His eyes locked onto the heavy wooden gavel resting on the podium. In a flash, he shoved the nearest deputy and lunged forward with the precision of a cornered animal. The room erupted screams, overturned chairs, frantic motion. He seized the gavel like a club, and then, in a moment that chilled everyone to the core, he yanked an elderly woman from the front row and held her in front of him as a shield. "Nobody move," he bellowed, the gavel raised like a weapon. "I walk out of here, or she gets it." The crowd froze in horror. Chaos reigned at the edges, but in the eye of the storm stood Tom, calm and focused, drawing his service weapon. In one smooth motion. No shouting, no panic, just that quiet iron voice. "Let her go, Robert." The name hit Bob like a punch to the chest. For a brief second, he hesitated. "It's over." "Don't make it worse," Tom continued, low and steady. "It's already worse," Bob roared, his voice cracking. "You have no idea." He began backing toward the door, dragging the terrified woman. Deputies locked on him in a tense semicircle, weapons raised but unable to take a shot. And that's when I moved. Not a sprint, just a silent, steady maneuver, using the chaos, the toppled chairs, and the panicked crowd as cover. My brother David saw me and understood instantly. He shifted, drawing Bob's gaze for half a second. That was the opening I needed. My training kicked in. Exploit the weakness, create the distraction, end the threat. I grabbed a heavy folding chair, clumsy but solid. 10 feet away now. I raised it, steeled myself, and shouted, "Hey, Bobby!" He turned, startled by the name, by the voice from his buried past. His grip faltered, his stance slipped, and for the first time, I saw fear, not rage or desperation, but the flicker of realization that it was finally, truly over. In that fleeting moment of hesitation, Bob's grip on the terrified woman loosened just enough, and Tom saw his chance. Now, he shouted. To her incredible credit, the woman instantly dropped to the floor like dead weight, giving the deputies a clear line, but I was already closer. Without pausing to think, I swung the heavy metal chair with every ounce of adrenaline-charged strength. I had not at Bob's head, but at his knee. I wasn't trying to kill him. I was trying to end it. The chair struck with a sickening crunch, and Bob let out a guttural howl of pain, his leg crumpling beneath him. The gavel flew from his hand and clattered across the floor. He stumbled, trying to regain balance, but before he could rise, Tom was on him like a force of nature. My son, the police chief, didn't reach for cuffs right away. He used his fists. A vicious right hook snapped Bob's head to the side, followed by a knee to the gut that doubled him over. It wasn't by the book, it was personal. A son delivering justice not just as an officer, but as a protector. Bob dropped like a broken marionette, gasping and stunned. The deputies rushed in, cuffing him as he lay sprawled and groaning. Just like that, it was over. The chaos evaporated, leaving only silence and heavy breathing. I stood frozen, chair still in hand, my pulse pounding like war drums. Then I looked across the room and saw Karen, still on her knees, blank and broken. A deputy lifted her to her feet and began leading her past me. Our eyes met. No more arrogance, no venom, just emptiness. The prideful queen of the neighborhood was gone, replaced by a hollow shell whose empire of lies had finally collapsed. As she was led away, the stunned crowd parted in silence. And then, quietly, one person began to clap, then another, and another. Soon, the entire room filled with applause. Not for the violence, not for revenge, but for the truth, for justice, and for the courage it took to finally bring monsters into the light. It was for the release, for the breath of freedom long denied, to a community ruled by fear and manipulation. The years of hushed conversations, passive obedience, and quiet dread were finally over. The queen had fallen, and the monster was locked away. As Karen was shoved into the back of a squad car, the last sound to grace her ears was the applause of neighbors once too afraid to speak, now celebrating her downfall. In the eerie calm that followed, the flashing red and blue lights faded down the street. The crowd dispersed in stunned murmurs, and the clubhouse, once a monument to Karen's tyranny, now stood as a disheveled but liberated space. My brother, David, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I nodded, still trembling a little, but this time the words came with truth. I'm okay. And I was. The war was finally over. We had won. Over the following weeks, the full story unraveled. The state put the HOA into receivership, and an independent audit revealed Karen and Bob had siphoned off nearly $500,000 over 10 years. The murder of Martin Gables, once a 20-year-old cold case, was officially solved. Bob, real name Bobby Genovese, had been a small-time criminal present when his boss killed Gables over gambling debts. The journal in the metal box was Gables' own, an insurance policy Bob had hidden for years. Karen knew everything. She had met him after his prison stint, masterminded his new identity and designed their suburban con. She was charged as an accessory to murder in addition to her mountain of fraud. They weren't just arrested, they were gone for good. And slowly, the neighborhood began to breathe again. On Friday nights, folding chairs appeared in driveways where neighbors laughed and retold the story of that unforgettable meeting, each retelling more dramatic than the last. The absurd rules were the first casualties of freedom. Flowers bloomed in front yards, bright, defiant blossoms Karen would have despised. Hank, the quiet man with the chip bag and the camera stack out, was voted in as interim HOA president. His first act? Passing a motion to allow for maximum seasonal appropriateness of garden gnomes all year long. Then he had the mailboxes painted a cheerful yellow, the same color Karen once called vulgar. On a sun-drenched Saturday, I was out front polishing my Mustang, the fender gleaming like new in my own driveway, right where it belonged. David relaxed on the porch with a cold beer. Then Tom pulled up in his truck, out of uniform and off-duty. Just my son again. He joined us on the steps with a beer of his own. "We didn't, you know," Tom said at last, his voice cutting through the stillness. "What you did leaking the info, setting up that whole scene at the meeting, it probably broke about a dozen departmental regulations." I turned to him, waiting for the lecture, but instead, he took a slow pull from his beer and let a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "It was all so brilliant," he added. "We never would have found that journal without your insane plan." I nodded, but the question that had been gnawing at me wouldn't let go, the one about justice and vengeance, about doing what was right even if it wasn't by the book. "We walked the line, didn't we?" I asked. Tom stared out at the now calm neighborhood, its lawns trimmed, mailboxes cheerful, and streets quiet in a way they hadn't been for years. "I think we walked it perfectly," he replied. "They broke the law, and we made damn sure they faced every bit of justice they deserved." And it was true. We hadn't bent the world for revenge, we had exposed the rot, ripped out the lies, and brought the truth into the light. What we had now wasn't the kind of brittle, suffocating peace Karen had imposed with her rules and punishments. This was something real. A peace earned through struggle, paid for with courage, and sealed with a battered chair and a 20-year-old journal. As I sat there on my porch between my brother and my son, the lake shimmering in the distance, the sun catching just right on. The polished chrome of my Mustang parked proudly in my driveway, I realized something had shifted deep inside me. The noise, the tension, the constant hum of unease that had been my companion for so long, it was gone. In its place was silence, not empty, not hollow, but full. Full of healing, of justice, of earned rest. And in that golden, quiet moment, I knew I had finally found what I'd been searching for all along, peace that was real and mine.